It has not been a good Earth month for the Liberals on the environment file. On Friday, one environmental group announced it's suing Minister Catherine McKenna. It says she violated an act aimed at protecting endangered species, in this case, the woodland caribou. The same day, a high-profile eco-activist, Bill McKibben, called Justin Trudeau a danger to the environment and compared him to Donald Trump. And earlier this month, David Suzuki told iPolitics he is bitterly disappointed with the Prime Minister. All the harsh words for a man who not long ago won global praise for signing the Paris Accord. Is this government failing to live up to its own billing on the environment? Joining me again on the Sunday Scrum, Susan Riley and John Ibbotson. They join me from Ottawa. All right, I want to start by reading part of Bill McKibben's column this week in The Guardian. Bill McKibben, by the way, is the founder of 350.org, an environmental group that wants to keep all fossil fuels in the ground. Here's what he wrote about Trudeau in The Guardian. When it comes to the defining issue of our day, climate change, he's a brother to the old orange guy in Washington. If Canada digs up that oil and sells it to people to burn, it will produce, according to the math whizzes at Oil Change International, 30% of the carbon necessary to take us past the 1.5 Celsius target that Canada helped set in Paris. Susan, is this a fair assessment?
I think Bill McKibben's criticism is well-founded and just. I think that particular example is a bit misleading for the simple reason that it's predicated on the notion that the vast reserves of the tar sands are all going to be exploited. And if that happened, yes, indeed, it would, it would just blow all global targets out of the water. But it would take a century to work our way through that reserve. And oil does not have a century left. I mean, oil is finished as far as I'm concerned. So I think he was right. And I think he's actually kind of violated one of the shibboleths of Canadian politics, which is you're not allowed to say that kind of a thing. Linda McQuaig, an NDP candidate back in the last election, got in trouble for suggesting that some of the oil around Fort McMurray has to stay in the ground if we're going to meet our Paris commitments. That was just simply the truth, and yet she was treated like a pariah. Justin Trudeau himself got in trouble. You remember saying a while ago that the oil sands is going to have to gradually be phased out. Again, he was forced to recant. All they are doing, all these statements do, including McKibben, is state the obvious. We can't continue on the route of pipelines and more oil production and meet those Paris targets. They're simply incompatible.
John.
Well, this is absolutely true. But I mean, there are three contradictions here. The first is that Justin Trudeau wants to meet this 2% or even possibly 1.5% target. Two, he's using Stephen Harper's climate change goals in order to meet it when it can't possibly be met using the conservative numbers, which are the numbers that exist right now. And third, the more you take out of the ground in northern Alberta, the harder even those modest targets are to meet. The fact remains, though, that you can talk about this all you want. The market is always the most powerful force in any of these things. And what's really happening is that the Americans are fracking like crazy. They are driving down the price of oil and gas. Electricity use is stagnant in the United States. It hasn't increased since the recession, actually. And so there's going to be a glut of oil and gas going forward that will make it economically unfeasible to take that stuff out of the ground in the oil sands, regardless of what the climate change deniers or skeptics or advocates may maintain.
And it looks increasingly unlikely that China is going to move into that gap because China has had quite a course correction recently as well. And now, in the absence of, now that Trump has withdrawn from this file, China is claiming leadership on the climate change. Now, they're late to on the climate change file. They're late to the game. They're obviously driven by the intense smog levels in Beijing, which affects the families of the highest cadres of the Communist Party of China. But China, as Justin Trudeau once infelicitously pointed out, being a dictatorship, when the Chinese leadership decides we're going to go electric, we're going to start shutting down, backing away from coal, it's going to happen.
Yeah, we learned this week that a plan to reduce, I think you mentioned this, that to reduce methane emissions has been pushed back by 3 years.
Yes.
The environment minister says the delay is because the government is understanding the perspective of industry. At what point does this start? You're shaking your head, Susan. I'll let you take it from there.
Well, I mean, what they're doing, you know, is Trump is, you know, has appointed this this guy Scott Pruitt, who's very hostile to climate change initiatives, as head of the EPA. And one of the first things they've decided to do is look at those recent agreement, the last agreement between Obama and Trudeau to reduce methane emissions. So the U.S. is now pulling back from that commitment. So Canada's decided, I guess Canadian industries said, well, we have to pull back too because we're going to be uncompetitive. Methane is a small part of the emissions problem, but a very powerful greenhouse gas. It's kind of more damaging than its numbers would suggest. This is a major withdrawal from a very modest kind of, you know, improvement that the Trudeau government had managed to obtain.
The Trudeau government... go ahead, John.
But I can understand that if you are an environmentalist and you cast a ballot in the last election primarily because you believed you were going to be getting a greener government with Justin Trudeau, you do have every cause to be disappointed and angry. The fact remains, however, that through all the years that Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, his position was, we can't get very far away from where the Americans are. If the Americans move on climate change, we'll move on climate change. If the Americans don't, we won't, because we can't allow the competitive disadvantage to become too great. Justin Trudeau came to office with all sorts of promises about growing the economy and protecting the environment at the same time.
Right.
But there's very, very little you can actually do. Liberals are, at the end of the day, pragmatists, and they will not allow climate change activities to render Canadian industry uncompetitive with the United States. Well, that's all there is to it.
That's what I was going to say. Justin Trudeau's always said, I mean, if you go back on the record, he's always said he will balance the needs of the economy with the needs of the environment, that it wouldn't be all business all the way, nor would it be environment all the way.
And if Hillary Clinton were president and she were moving aggressively to reduce emissions, to tighten fuel consumption levels, and all the other things that a Democrat president might have been doing, albeit in the face of a resistant Congress, then we would be moving too. But we have instead a Republican president and a Republican Congress. They are going to do nothing on climate change for the next 4 years. That's all there is to it. And it makes it simply true that there's very little we can do as well.
Okay.
I don't agree. Justin Trudeau is jumping on an old broken down nag that's heading in the wrong direction. I'm talking about the Trump administration when it comes to climate change. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, elsewhere, including actually in California, there's progress being made. I was at an Earth Day thing yesterday in a small village on the, in West Quebec near where I live. And there was a lot of there were a couple of electric vehicles there. There was a lot of excitement about electric vehicles. Quebec, because of the abundance of hydropower, is really pushing electric vehicles. The price is dropping. There is a kind of revolution going on at a neighborhood level. John's going to say, and I agree, it's mostly higher income people at this moment. But sometimes that's how things start to move. And I think the Trudeau government is moving in the wrong direction altogether.
Well, just a few months ago, we were told by the world scientists that we were at, you mentioned this as well, a very dangerous point, perhaps even a point of no return already in terms of the Earth's heating. How do we interpret these criticisms from David Suzuki, from Bill McGibbons and others, these actions by, against the backdrop of what the government is doing or not doing? John? Well,
they're right to despair. If the United States, which is one of the world's largest emitters, decided it's going to take no action whatsoever, in fact, it's going in the opposite direction. It's permitting coal to be used again as a fuel, although I don't think it's economically viable for coal to have much of a role anymore going forward. But if the United States, which is one of the world's major emitters, just walks away from the table, that's it. One of the world's major emitters has walked away from the table, and Canada will become quite quiet as well. At this point, the only real hope is that, I would just say, at this point, the only real hope is that India, which is electrifying and using coal to do it, if India moves further away and starts using greener technologies, if the Chinese use greener technologies, there's some hope there. But from North America, nada.
I disagree, John, and it contradicts your previous claim that it will be the market that determines this. I agree, mainly because we have such a spineless, compromised government, and always have, no matter what coloration of government. They've been spineless for years. The market, you know, a lot of the major oil players have been pulling out of or parking their investments in the tar sands, recognizing that it's an expensive and polluting form of energy. I think it's on the decline, and I think the challenge is to manage the decline so that people, especially in Alberta, aren't, you know, unduly hurt. Like that's where government focus should be, instead of just remaining silent because there's this, you know, climate denier in the White House.